Hello and welcome, viewers. You are watching Amhara Media Corporation English service. Today, I've got a guest from Denver, whom I'm going to talk virtually via Zoom. Today, we are going to discuss on the so-called Ethiopian Stabilization, Peace and Democracy Act draft bill, or in short, HR 6600, which is literally called anti-Ethiopian bill, drafted by U.S. Congress members. To share his view and expertise on the issue, my guest is virtually on. My guest is Ethiopian American Civic Council President Deacon Yosef Teferi. He is working with Ethiopian diaspora against HR 6600 draft bill. Deacon Yosef, welcome to Amhara Media Corporation English service. Let's begin with the simple and basic question, which is important for the rest of our question. Let's see the contents of this draft bill. Let's begin with this.
The basic premise is the question evolving around human rights violation. So it alleges that internationally recognized human rights atrocities has taken place in Ethiopia. Mm-hmm. And also Ethiopia is a country that has committed genocide. This is the fundamental premise. And obviously, it breaks it down, and mostly that these violations are an extension or a byproduct, so to speak, of the war in Tigray. Primarily focuses on the period when the war began up until the Ethiopian troops were removed from the Tigray territory. You know, when the deeper you go into the resolutions and each provisions contained, you come to realize that they are talking in specific timeline and specific group of people. That does not include all human rights violation taking place in Ethiopia as such. The other part of it is obviously it comes towards the tail end of the resolutions. What it demands is to have an unfettered access where they would send, quote unquote, an independent investigator of human rights violation in Ethiopia. So question is, who are these independent investigators? Who chooses them? Who sends them? And all of this. Because already, as you know, the United Nations Human Rights Council have issued report. There is no reference to genocide or a crime against humanity as they allege. So how one can sidestep that report and still demand for having its own independent, quote unquote, investigator to have an unfettered access is, we believe, is unnecessary, unattainable, and ought to be considered almost illegal for any sovereign nation to allow that. So that's essentially the premise. And then we can break it down to each demands that is contained in there, which, by the way, the Ethiopian government has already addressed the demands that is contained in both resolutions.
Okay, thank you. Let's move to the other important question. Does the draft bill itself has any international law ground to be endorsed on a sovereign state, just like what they're doing here in Ethiopia? Is there any legal ground?
No, there is no international law that allows that. No. That's why it's illegal. Mm-hmm. However, the United States was got a wherewithal and has a tremendous reach globally. As you and I speak, has sanctions over 43 countries. You know, and that's essentially the same measure that they are threatening to do on Ethiopia. So they've been doing it for the last 70 years, since the end of Second World War. And their argument, and by and large, is that, look, instead of fighting a bloody war like in the Second World War, we need to come up with a mechanism to sort of pacify the world. And one of the mechanisms is rich countries like the United States to impose sanction on countries they don't agree with. Okay, and that is sanction don't work. The first country that got sanctioned is North Korea. They have been under sanction for over 70 years, but it didn't make the government of North Korea to collapse. In fact, three generations of the same family still rule the country. Now, the people of North Korea, they're paying the price, especially when you compare them with their relatives down in the South and how much economically that the South Koreans have lived without a sanction. So the only difference between the two Koreans is one is under sanction for 70 years and the other one isn't. So sanction is a form of war, like I said. And in this case, HR 6600 is a complete sanction. In this case, it looks like they've basically thrown everything they've got on us. That's why this is a very dangerous resolution. Typically, they involve World Bank and the International Monetary Fund to be a collaborating financial arm to make sure sanction works. In this case, they're asking or demanding 12 of the largest financial institutions to be part of the sanctions on Ethiopia. Okay, it also includes the European Union, United Kingdom, even NATO. It even puts a sanction on countries that are favorable to Ethiopia, such as Turkey and United Arab Emirates and China. If their relationship with Ethiopia it does not stop being supportive because of Ethiopia, they are threatening even sanction to a third-party countries like them. Okay, so for many people who think that this sanction targets the Ethiopian government's officials, that's a misnomer. That's not the case. Okay, the reason I say that is President Biden has already issued a sanction against Ethiopian and Eritrean officials back in September 17 to be exact. But they found out that most of the leverage on sanction that you put on government officials, and if they have investments outside of Ethiopia or money that is they have in banks and world in financial institution, and the department that is assigned to investigate that came back 3 months later, and they said they couldn't find anything in both ends. So what did they do? They came back 3 months later on sanction, a form of sanction, by erasing Ethiopia from AGOA. Now you're coming away from government officials directly to the ordinary Ethiopians that are going to pay the burden for having this type of sanction. Now, this resolution in both chambers, you take AGOA and multiply it 100-fold to understand the impact economically, how devastating this could be. Okay, it's not about just having a foreign reserve. Even private firms and individuals cannot even invest in Ethiopia.
The surface title of this draft bill pretends that it aimed at ensuring peace and stability in Ethiopia. What is the real intention behind this draft bill and those congressmen who designed this draft bill?
They're demanding many things, and I'll highlight the main ones. For example, it asks the Ethiopian government to cease and desist in terms of offensive military operation against TPLF. It demands that. Mm-hmm. Well, my friend, the Ethiopian government has already done that. Essentially, the offensive operation of militarily has stopped at the border of the Tigray region. So there is your answer. It asks for no offensive military action, and Ethiopia does not have offensive military operation at this time. It asks humanitarian corridor to be open. Even last week, there is the announcement for the truth that Ethiopia has announced answers that question. It asks for political dialogue among opposition parties and opposing forces to come to the table. Ethiopia launched the Reconciliation Dialogue Commission. I don't know what's called, but the parliament authorized
the National Dialogue Commission.
Yeah, the National Dialogue Commission. There's your answer. It has released prisoners. It has also it asks for the emergency creed to be removed. Well, Ethiopia lifted it only halfway through from what it is intended at the beginning. We can go down through the line. So the issue is, honestly, are these people really have looked at truly what is the fact on the ground, or what has taken place in Ethiopia before they demanded in these provisions that have put on, because it looks like we're totally in a parallel universe, that they are, it looks like they have written these demands on other country outside of Ethiopia, because Ethiopia has pretty much addressed most of these demands that have put on these resolutions. So what is so interesting, my friend, is that the administration side, i.e. President Biden, the State Department, and even the special envoy, Ambassador David, who was visiting Ethiopia even last week, they're all saying they don't support these resolutions. They're all saying that we would rather prefer to engage with Ethiopia on a constructively and a diplomatic way, and they see there are things that are showing improvement on humanitarian issues, on the war fronts, and much of the other demands that are put onto this resolution. So they pretty much have given Congress that they should not push this. Foreign policies, by in general, in the United States, is really the president's prerogative, okay? Whatever the president decides to do, or the direction he wants the United States foreign policy to go, that's basically essentially how it's done. Does it counsel the Senate? Yes, but it's really in a rare occasion that even the Senate overrules or try to impose a different direction what the president sets out to do. That's one thing that is a little bit strange about this, my friend, is the fact that the State Department has already said that such a resolution is not going to be helpful of achieving our interest. By the way, when all of this said and done, why is the United States doing this? The Red Sea corridor is the hottest geopolitical space on the planet. And in the next 30 years will be even more so, because the global economic output is shifting from Europe to Asia. That means all goods and services that is exported from Asia has to be channeled through the Red Sea. And the Red Sea, by the way, the center of gravity for geopolitical focus is Ethiopia. So unless you see this from 30,000 feet up and looking down, what is in the play, okay? We cannot see, we think this is about some things, this ethnic group over here to that ethnic group's human rights violation. Maybe United States has a kind heart about this. No, this is all about self-interest, their interest, geopolitical interest. They've made a conclusion that they need someone in Ethiopia that can basically represent their interest. And their interest at this point, they are betting on TPLF. So whether they are militarily successful and attempted and failed, or by such a draconian legislative measure to force Ethiopia's hand, this is the mechanism they're playing. But all of it is about their own interests. And that's one thing I want to clearly indicate.
Apart from the general adverse effect of this draft bill, what could be the specific effect of this draft bill on each and every citizen of Ethiopia?
I think the only probably closest example I can give you is Zimbabwe.
Okay.
And when the sanction came on Zimbabwe, Zimbabweans were facing 1,000% of inflation a day, not a year. I don't even know how, as a nation, they have been able to survive. Okay, these kind of sanction is so damaging to the ordinary people. Okay, first of all, if Ethiopia were to be blocked from the international financial grid, import goods that you see every day people use will literally disappear. Okay, so the second is the reserve capital for foreign exchange. Let's take a look at the diaspora. The diaspora in 2019 has remitted 3.6 billion US dollars to Ethiopia. If this sanction passed, that money that Ethiopian diaspora send home can be cut off. Imagine the families who survive from people who, their own family members, in the US and the Arab countries and Europe, all over the world, who send a remittance to support their families. Imagine where they fall. Go down to the factories that were subsidized by AGOA. Now they have shut down those factories. Go and talk to those people that were employed. Now they are without job and ability to earn anything. Okay, multiply that 100 times, because even private investments, we couldn't. The diaspora, forget the diaspora. Private companies cannot themselves even invest in Ethiopia. Okay, so job creation will be erased. On the other part of it is that when these sanctions, God forbids, if they come upon in Ethiopia, it will not affect all the Ethiopian regions equally or uniformly. It proportionally affects heavily the regions that particularly have gone through the war, primarily the Amhara, the Afar, and the Tigray region, which is now, by fair estimate, say that it may take 5 to 7 years to rebuild it. This is the case in many post-war reconstruction anywhere in the world, that how long it would take, not only economically rebuilding it, but in human cost also. But if you add this sanction, the Amhara and the Afar and the Tigray people, forget 5 to 7 years. It may take up to 20 years to rebuild it. And so the impact of sanction in so many scale is complete. It will not give you any kind of reprieve for you to be able to escape from the damage that it will bring on. So 99% of it, like I said, it's going to impact the ordinary people, and particularly the Amhara and the Afar, or the people that have been affected by the war.
Though the Ethiopian diaspora are protesting against this draft bill, there are also some other members of the diaspora, maybe there are few, who are working for the endorsement of this draft bill. What do you think is the motive behind these few individuals working for endorsement of this draft bill?
First and foremost, we have as an issue, as I said earlier, it's not just TPLF behind it, it's Egypt also behind it. In fact, heavily, Egypt is the one that's really pushing this. Let's talk about the grievances of some Ethiopians, even in the diaspora, feel about what's going on in Ethiopia. In many instances, there are grievances that are eminent of the fact that, and particularly in Amhara and Afar region, and the people from this region have been targeted. Their human rights violations have been perpetrated, and it seemed like people are not accountable, that the government has not been forceful in making such violation to become a national priority. My friend, in so many levels, one needs to make sure that in any country, much less like Ethiopia, an ancient country, such a violation should never take place. And we need to make sure the government is also accountable to make sure that it needs to protect the human right of its citizens. It's a national call that we need to make sure that all of us, hand in hand, together, need to fight against it and make sure that not only the perpetrators are accountable, that such things should not take place in Ethiopia, okay? If we don't do that, and we say we recognize this and we're accountable to this, and we'll do everything we have in our national resource to make sure this doesn't take place, somebody from outside will come to you, because a human right issue is an international issue, and rightfully so, okay? So it has been so since the Second World War, and Ethiopia, as a signatory, as it joins the United Nations, has agreed to make sure that human right issue is something that it will respect and will make sure that others respect also outside of Ethiopia. But this is, because human right issue is a global issue. The trouble is, other countries like United States use that as an excuse to enforce their own interest and agenda on the internal and sovereignty of countries like Ethiopia, okay? But here is the kicker. If we don't own it and we make sure we guarantee our own citizens from such mayhem, then we open the door for other global powers to say, well, step aside because you haven't done enough. We're going to be the one who are going to come in. We're going to be the one who's going to send independent, quote unquote, investigators to come into your land, have an unfettered access. And believe me, they will never do any of the stuff that they say, but it gives them not an excuse, but a legitimate reason to demand, like they have it on HR 6600. All of us as a nation, as a society, need to come close to condemn and demand for this to stop. But at the same time, that red line is that we cannot allow foreign powers to come in and break our sovereign right.
The Ethiopian government has been exerting efforts to resolve the conflict in Ethiopia so as to create a stable Ethiopia. For instance, the government has been declaring unilateral ceasefire in the past, and recently our government has issued an indefinite humanitarian truce in order to provide humanitarian support for the people living in Tigray and those people affected by the conflict. Despite this fact, there are influences without considering the efforts of the government. What's your reflection on this point?
In the geopolitical sphere around the Horn of Africa, they believe that TPLF serve their interests than anybody else they can find. They are worried about China's influence in the region and in the close relationship it's forming with particularly Eritrea. All of that is making them nervous. Whether TPLF survives as just a political entity, or even some of them, even including the gentleman that voted for S3199, Senator Coons, who, by the way, was the initial envoy, the presidential envoy that came to Ethiopia and met with Dr. Abiy. He even dared to say on CNN that Tigray may become an independent nation. And he says, and including in that is independence is the Western Tigray. They don't even call Walqait by name. They basically call it Western Tigray. Right. So their idea is, look, we want to see TPLF survive. And if things doesn't work, we would like to see it even become secede from Ethiopia, or have some form of autonomy from Ethiopia, so that we have not just a political group that we can rely on, but a region, a territory that we can claim. Okay, so keep your eyes on it. Okay, so even if you in Ethiopia today, if you today, as you and I speak, even if we send 20,000 airlift aid in Tigray, okay, there is, I mean, yeah, it might be very difficult for them to come up with their own talking points, but that's not their goal. That's not their interest. It's not about feeding the Tigray people. It is their geopolitical interest to make sure those points that we discussed earlier come to fruition. And one of the ways is to squeeze the hand of the Ethiopian federal government to sit down forcefully to negotiate with TPLF. In a way, what they're saying is all the things that they have been advocating, okay, for TPLF and for that force to go back and to restore the status quo in the way they claim it ought to be restored. That's where the real battle is. That's why they're coming up with this draconian resolution. They know we're not that bad people. They know that we're God-fearing people. They know that Ethiopians intermarried, and even though with all these ethnic strifes and whatnot that we see, that in general Ethiopians were peaceful people. Okay, they know all of that. It's not, these things are not lost in them. However, the geopolitical interest only comes through the division of Ethiopian, particularly in the ethnic fault lines. Okay, they know that. Okay, and so why we need to get rid of the ethnic-based political system in Ethiopia, why we need to ban ethnic-based political parties and regions and so on, is because it opens the door for foreign powers to utilize the way they are using on us regarding to TPLF. And if there was no TPLF, they would have created one for us, as long as we have this ethnic-based system. So we have to outlaw it so that we can join the civilized nation. Rwandans did it, Kenyans did it, Nigerians did it. They put it on their constitution. You are a political party? Yes. You can't be a political party for one ethnic group. You have to be a national political party that understands the interest of all ethnic groups. So if you are an Amhara political party, you can't call yourself Amhara political party. You have to be a national. That means you have to be concerned about all other ethnic groups. That's what they demanded in Kenya and Nigeria. As long as we have that system, we will always have a draconian resolution dare to challenge our sovereignty. HR 6600, in a way, is born out of our political system. It made it possible. If Ethiopia remained solid as a union, as a national union, respecting the cultures, the language, and the tradition, the history of each ethnic group, but yet not divided politically on an ethnic fault line, such a resolution would not have been possible. Not on a level that we see it. So what is it they want? Oh, they want a base, a political, economic, even military base in the region, okay? Because they are fearful. And the next 30 years, the European dominance of global economic output is the sun is rising to the other side, into the Asia, okay? And that corridor and that channel to global economy is going to be through Red Sea. And that is controlled by and large, 75%. What happens in the Red Sea is controlled by Ethiopia, or what happens to Ethiopia. Okay. And one last thing that I want to mention to you is that one of the things that we argue with them, okay, let's say you're successful in putting these sanctions against Ethiopia. What happens? Let's say your wish come true and Ethiopia becomes a failed state. Let's just say that, okay? Let's go 10 years from now and Ethiopia is a failed state. Are you sure you want that? Are you sure that benefits your geopolitical interest? You couldn't even deal with Somalia going through a failed state process. You couldn't even handle that. And if it wasn't for Ethiopia, in part to help you mitigate the danger that came about with Somalia's status as a failed state, your national security would have been compromised in the region. Can you imagine Ethiopia going through that? So your solution that you're coming up with this resolutions ultimately hurt your own economic, security, and political interest, that of United States. So are you sure you want to do this? And that's why this makes no sense on a long-term objectivity. Even if you see it from the side of the United States, and forget Ethiopia's interest for now, this is against their interest even if they are successful with it. And that's why I wanted to conclude this by saying, because there are 1 million Ethiopian Americans that live in the United States. Our name is Ethiopian American. Our children, the only country they know is Ethiopia. We're not Ethiopian Chinese. We're not Ethiopian Russian. We are Ethiopian Americans. What does that mean? We would like to see the relationship between Ethiopia and the United States to remain in good standing and being always strong. Okay, this benefits both countries, but it has to be for mutual interest, based on respect, and one without violating its sovereignty. And this is what this is the fundamental premise in the way that we are campaigning to make sure that we make sense with the foreign policymakers in the United States.
In fact, after the launch of the recent indefinite humanitarian truce, the international community is applauding the efforts of the Ethiopian government. Do you think it will have a contribution to curb the endorsement of this draft bill?
Absolutely. It has already made that. Many of the coverage that we have seen has been quite positive, because it's hard to argue against that. Even if they don't believe it, it is hard to say. They can't be pounding on the table and say, why did Ethiopia declared humanitarian truce? It wouldn't make sense. So politically, they are put in a situation in every turn. And one of the things that we noticed, my friend, is this: throughout since the war started, some of the stuff that Ethiopia has done has really shocked them. They didn't expect that. Whether it's the unilateral ceasefire, they didn't anticipate that. Okay, even the counter-offensive militarily, they know Ethiopia literally crushed TPLF, crushed it militarily. They know. So, in fact, they were very fearful that the Ethiopian forces will go all the way to Mekelle. Okay, and we know we've had this conversation with some few people in the State Department. They were very fearful, particularly the Amhara militias and Liu Hail,
the special forces. The special forces.
The special forces. They were extremely fearful that they will enter to capture Mekelle, and when that did not happen, they were literally shocked. So there are things that Ethiopia does. It seems like that is not part of the narrative that they were developing, and it came as a shock, and they had to regroup and to say, oh, okay, so this is okay. So they will come in shocked, with this perplexed face and say, Ethiopia just announced this, and I think we welcome this is a good thing, but we still have other issues. And that's what they say. They didn't expect the humanitarian truce to take place. It happened actually while the special envoy, Ambassador David, was there. They were literally quite shocked for this to happen. But do you think they will stop? No, because like I said, their interest is something that is not spoken in the room. They don't talk about geopolitics. They don't talk about the threat of China. They don't talk about why they want, support TPLF for the reasons that I outlined. Those things are not spoken. You understand?
They just go under the surface.
It goes under the surface, my friend, and that's what the Americans call the elephant in the room. Except nobody sees it, nobody talks about it. Okay, so until that issue is addressed, look, in 2018, the United States, because we were closely working when we were passing HR 128. We were, literally living in Congress, you could say. So we've seen the dynamics, okay? We almost literally saw it the week that the United States finally said, maybe TPLF cannot hold the center together. It's time for TPLF to go. We were there. We sensed it, okay? But they did not want to see TPLF just abandon Addis Ababa and go back to Mekelle and for things to go the way it did. That wasn't their expectation, and they didn't like that, okay? They wanted TPLF still to remain in the ruling party, still have an influence, to have still a say in the federal government, okay? On the other end, their expectation was the government that replaces TPLF is going to behave exactly the same way TPLF has worked with them. So anything less that may come out later on has shocked them till this day, okay? Because, hey, TPLF is their, go-to guys. I know they've turned into become almost a mercenary group for anything the United States wanted. And they told them to leave the power to new reformists that are coming in. And they start to find out these reformists are a little bit nationalist. They're not like the yes man that they were used to for the previous 27 years. So you could see it when immediately they start regretting it, okay? So there were demands that were put on Ethiopia, that Ethiopia said it's a national interest, and that offended them. The talks between Ethiopia and Eritrea and Somalia for some form of a Commonwealth cooperation, they didn't know anything about it, or they were not consulted. That really sent them to the orbit, okay? And then when you put that on a bigger map from the geopolitical activities, then you got a very potent, very radioactive political situation. So what we do, okay, releasing the prisoners, what we do, creating a national dialogue, what we do, not entering or having offensive measure militarily in the Tigray region, what we do in stopping the emergency creed, all of that, they will see it and they say, okay, but we still have other things, because their interest is much different than what is on the paper.
Along with the efforts being exerted by the government, what can the Ethiopian people do to stop the endorsement of this draft bill?
If you don't like what we see in the form of these resolutions that are coming in to infringe upon our sovereignty, then we need to take care of our problems internally, whatever those measures are. And we, Ethiopian American Civic Council, send a letter to the Ethiopian Parliament. We're not demanding, we don't have the power to demand, but we're suggesting, advising the Parliament to own this case, to form an independent commission that actually studies this and finds, who's at fault, why this is happening, what are the internal factors, what is the outside factors. and then find a recommendation for these things not to take place. Okay? This is something we have to do. When we do that, then our sovereignty will be even strengthened by the fact that no one can say, I will come in to take care of these issues that are taking place in your country. Okay? On the other end, for those who represent, and particularly the Afar, Amhara, or the Afar region, and the people that have suffered incalculable suffering, we need to stop and pause and say, if these measures were to pass, will they hurt the very people that we care about? The answer is resounding, without any question. Economically, politically, it will be a substantial price to pay for the dear people that we seem to care and represent. I think we can all coalesce and come together, advocate for issues together, and make Ethiopia pass this very, very consequential period in its long history. And this is what history calls upon us to do. And I hope we overcome this division.
Deacon Yosef, thank you for sharing us this information. I hope we'll have some other virtual interview via online platforms. For now, it is all I want to ask you. Thank you so much and have a good time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you for inviting.